jiu-jitsu, it kind of provided an environment for me to learn how to be pushed and uncomfortable. And I think eventually what happened is I took that same mentality into my personal life, my relationships with my wife, with my kids, even into the workplace, where instead of avoiding conflict or running from things that scared me, or even things that I just didn't find pleasant, say like, some big, heavy, sweaty guy laying on my face, I started to embrace it. And instead of running from it, to borrow something that I remember Chris Howder saying a long time ago, I would run to the things that made me uncomfortable. And that's what I was kind of crystallized in my head after I talked to Vic was, well, so what exactly did change? Like, at what point did I decide that I wanted to do more or be a better person or care more about my relationships with my children or with my wife or even my friends? And I'm not proud of it, and it's kind of cute and funny now that everybody refers to me as like the lovable dickhead and stuff. But at this point, but that might have been after she squirted me in the face with ketchup. But I'm at a point now where honestly I would love to shed that. I used to take pride in it, and now I'm starting to realize that it's a lot more fulfilling and rewarding to build people up rather than constantly looking to tear people down, which I'm embarrassed to say that I lived the first half of my life looking for chinks in people's armor, finding fault in people, carrying very strong opinions, being unwilling to change my mind on things. And I'm not saying I'm there by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, as you know, I've been struggling in the last several months even just to learn to let go of that negativity and rather than look for the faults in people, try to understand, sympathize, be empathetic. But not only that, but it's much more helpful to me to identify the positive things in other people, and what can I do to enhance that aspect of them, rather than focusing on the negative, which never really benefits. And one of the quotes that you use, and again, coincidentally, we both started, I think, following the Stoics a little bit more. But that quote, it was when I turned 43 this year in July. I posted it on Facebook, which is, my goal this year is to be strict with myself and lenient with others. So I have a lot of people ask me, because I do feel like sometimes I won the lottery and I'm opening a third and fourth location. Been very successful just in the gym business. I've been successful as a competitor.
I remember with Travis in particular, Jiu-jitsu, I can kind of give you a little bit of a timeline, and it would have been purple belt. Because white to purple, Travis's game was footlocks and guillotines and not playing guard. And so he would do anything he can not to play guard or put on gi pants. And he would show up with shorts and guillotine footlock, which served you well in competition up to that point. But had he not said, well, I'm going to play off my back sometimes and take the risk of somebody passing my guard and getting on top, he wouldn't have been able to go up and be able to compete at brown or black belt. Which in the irony now is you have a full game, but you like to play guard.
Right.
But that didn't evolve really till purple belt. And so that would be one thing I noticed. And that's a lesson, and there's a jiu-jitsu lesson in there. It's like, you have to be willing to put yourself in vulnerable positions in order to grow. If you're not willing to do that, you can't grow in jiu-jitsu or anything else. Like, if you're not willing to learn guard and take a chance that somebody's going to pass, and in the process you're going to get your guard passed over and over, and you're going to get smashed, and Brian Stromberg is going to be on top of you. All kinds of things are going to happen. But if you're not willing to go through that process, you can't get to the other side where you develop the skills. And for something to be worthwhile, by definition, it's hard, right? And hard things are hard, but that's what makes them worthwhile. And then jiu-jitsu teaches you that over and over and over again, and then you start to apply that in your life.
I mean, we've gone through a big portion of our life. Half of our life we've spent with each other, which is, quite a bit of time. And that was actually the same trip where what Matt was just discussing with my game. That was the same trip that I became really defensive when I was cornered in a pub with John Kavanaugh, Carl Tanswell, and Matt, having just heel hooked somebody in Ireland at the seminar, and they basically confronted me and said, look, you can't do footlocks anymore. You need to stop. Like, you just need to stop doing footlocks. And, you know, that ruffled my feathers and bristled me. I mean, it made me defensive, which is another struggle with my own journey right now is getting over being defensive and emotional. So it was that trip. But on that same trip, Matt and I got on a bus together, and we traveled from Dublin to Belfast. And I remember sitting in that bus. It was a long bus ride. I'd been around him already at that point for 5 or 6 years, but it was that conversation where I felt like I'd really gained his approval and acceptance, and that for me was a pivotal point in my relationship with him. I think it was at that point that Matt had decided that I might be somebody who could be his partner in growing the organization and getting it to where it is now. And it's been an incredible journey, not just in terms of the business. From where we started, we were just joking about the Res Light mats on MLK, and we certainly as an organization have matured and gotten smarter over the years, and then within our own lives, I've seen him change dramatically, just in terms of acknowledging and appreciating other people, and you know, focusing less on yourself and kind of saying the things that you've probably always felt about the people around you and the people that support you and the people that look up to you. But now to see you be in a place in your life where you can use your words to build people up and to give them such a good feeling. And it's so easy, right? It doesn't cost you anything. All you have to do is stop and say, hey man, I just want to let you know I appreciate the role you play. Or, you know, I've seen you do it with your students now too, where there's just better engagement and recognition. So that was the trip that for me, and I don't know where at your point in our relationship where you said, hey, I can trust this person and I'm comfortable moving forward.
I trusted Travis long before that. The fact that you were traveling with me, right? I wasn't asking anybody to travel with me, so I was intentionally bringing him. But I wasn't always good at articulating that or acknowledging that. And I'm very not normally social. Like, I'm perfectly happy if I was alone for the next 4 years with a bunch of books, I'd probably be fine. I've had to learn to, you know, not be so introverted in talking to people. And so I think that was more of an acknowledgement of something that was there previously when I was just opening up a little bit more. But I obviously trusted him or I wouldn't have brought him with me. And if you're asking me what it is, it's just character. It's just people's ability to be authentic and sincere. And I'd rather have somebody who's sincere, who has faults, because we all have faults, than somebody who's putting on airs or who I can't trust. So that's always the most important thing. I don't remember a very specific incident, although I do remember that bus ride. I remember that trip pretty well. It was a good trip. You know, another example of this was just talking about business, and just basically did what I did when you showed up. And I'd have 60 to 80 students who were all awesome and hardcore, but you know, they were already tough. Most of them were already tough, which is why they were sticking around in the environment that I'd created. And I was very hesitant and resistant to any changes in business. And it's funny because the things that we seem to be the most offensive about are very deeply rooted biologically. And you're talking about sex, food, and money. And with money, really, it's about the accumulation of resources at a larger evolutionary level. And you know, if you're not raised with money, or for example, if you're raised with hippies who have no respect for money or the free market system, don't understand it, then that'll be a problem. Or in my case, that I wasn't raised that way at all. I was raised by a working class dad, but you know, he always lived paycheck to paycheck. And so his version of money was being frugal, but you know, you have one paycheck and then the next paycheck and you have a steady job. And so if you don't grow up with an understanding of money and how money works and how business works, and then it can be confusing and you can get defensive. And for years, couple years, I was watching Steve Whittier, one of our black belts, and I would go out to his place there and I would watch what he was doing, and I could see that it was having a positive effect, but I would still question him on everything and pester him on everything, and he was very good natured about it. He put up with all my questions, and then he would just respond in a very dry, logical way and lay out why he, in Steve Whittier way, where he would lay out why he was doing everything, and I couldn't really argue against his points. So I eventually, you know, and it took me a long time, but I eventually caved and realized, okay, so we need to bring some of this in. And then we were in Mexico. It was me, Steve, and Travis. And so I sat down to talk to Travis about it, and I got a reaction from Travis which was similar to what I had, which is, I've seen it in so many different people, where you got angry. Right. And he actually got mad and got up and left and went up to his hotel room. But the thing is, the next morning he woke up and he came downstairs and he said, let's do it. So he had that defensive reaction, but he went upstairs and he just realized what I realized. It just took me a lot longer than it did him, but okay, that just makes logical sense.
But why'd you have that reaction, Travis?
You know, I think similar to like what Matt was talking about with his upbringing. I mean, I had a dad who was in construction. Same thing. I mean, he provided for sure, and I didn't want for anything as a child, nor did my brother and sisters. But I was just raised in a, well, for one, let me back up. For one thing, I never believed that martial arts was a way to make a living, right? I didn't even see that as an opportunity. This was always a hobby. It wasn't until much later that I realized if you find something you're passionate about, the money always takes care of itself. But because I had always viewed this as a hobby and it was something that I loved and cherished, I was afraid to ruin it. You know what I mean? Like it was one of those things where you don't want to mess with something that's so good already. It's kind of that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I didn't want to disturb this beautiful space that I had where I could escape. You know, I could escape my problems. I could, like we started this conversation with, it provided such a transformative property for me, and I didn't have that anywhere else in my life as far as a meditative practice or anything like that. So I think part of my reaction was just I didn't want anyone else messing it up, and so when the idea of changing anything, and change is hard, right? So change not just in this, but anytime you have to change, it's hard. Even when the information you're presented with is sound, logical, rational, and it's the right thing, it doesn't mean it's easy, right? It's hard to change things. But I thought about it like Matt talked about, and I talked it over with Kisa too. I mean, she's always been such a perfect sounding board for me. It was easier for her because she was less attached. At the time, she wasn't even really doing jiu-jitsu yet. And so it was easy for her to look at it without emotion. It's funny, right? Because the stereotype is males, are less emotional, more logical, more rational. In my case, not so much. I may appear on the surface, or maybe I don't. I'm very emotional. I make a lot of rash, bad decisions using my emotions rather than my logic sometimes. And so she saw the logic in it right away. Yeah, when she was cool with it, I decided to give it a shot. And the one thing I will say about myself is, if I'm in, I'm all in. Like I don't halfway to commit to anything. I feel like time is the only thing we have. It's the only thing we have to sell. So my attitude is, whatever it is you're doing, like right now I'm doing this interview, this is the most important thing in my life right now. And so I'm 100% present in this right now, because I'll never get this moment back. And if there's something else I should be doing, then I shouldn't be here right now. I should be doing that thing. And so when we jumped into the business, we jumped in head first, and one of the best decisions I think we made, go ahead and, you know, get over our fears or emotional attachment to what we were used to and what we had. I mean, think about some of the things we did that we think back fondly of at the MLK gym, like the old ICC days, and Ricky and I loved that. Like I have really great memories of Brian Stromberg and you and me, and we're just banging our way and stuff. And But I look at that now and I go, man, would we have had the opportunity to positively impact people's lives the way I mean, think of the thousands of people that we've touched in different ways about how SBG changed their life, how Jiu-Jitsu changed their life, how the relationships that came out of this changed their lives. So, and I think the other thing is we're not done yet. Like, we're not done. We got bigger and better things to do. We got more people to affect, and we haven't figured it out yet.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, we're going to be sitting here 10 years from now, 15 years from now, we're going to look back and go, man, remember 10 or 15 years ago, we thought that was the best way? But the thing that I hope both of us are capable of doing is when we're presented with better ways, that we're willing to shed what we're so strongly attached to right now.
You know, when we're talking about change, I mean, the crucial piece to any of it, jiu-jitsu or otherwise, is you can't be in a state of what would technically be called doxastic closure, where you're unable to change your mind. So if I have any strongly held opinion or belief about martial arts or otherwise, I have to think of myself, what evidence could I be presented with that would allow me to change my opinion? And if I have none, then I'm either resting in something that's really solid, or probably, and this is more likely the case, I have some defensive reaction, some fear to it. And I can see that in business. To this day, I'll talk to people, they'll either get angry or they'll think they know what we're doing, and then when you talk to them actually about it, they have no idea, and which is evident either in their margins or their numbers. And it's just fear, and that fear then, defensive reaction, leads to the worst of all situations, whereas you think you know something you don't know. It's one thing if I know I don't know something. If I see a snake, I don't know if that snake's poisonous or not, I'm gonna leave it alone. But if I think I know that snake's not poisonous, but it's actually poisonous, it's a lot more dangerous. And people think they know things about particular topics. They think they know about martial arts business because they've been in the martial arts business for a long time, or they think they know about a mount position because they've been doing jiu-jitsu for a long time. It's like, have you really gone into the fundamentals of whatever that delivery system is? Have you really broken it down and looked at it? And even if you have, are you open-minded enough to say, somebody presents me with new material, I'm willing to change my mind, and I'm willing to revise my beliefs in light of new evidence? And that's super important. So you have to maintain that attitude, a willingness to revise your beliefs in light of new evidence, with a willingness to be vulnerable.
Back to the transformation thing, I think one of the hardest things about transformation, and probably the biggest single ingredient to it, is what you just said, and that is, you first have to have a willingness to change your beliefs, change your opinions when presented with new evidence. Because if you like today, you taught an awesome seminar on mount, right? And I was telling you yesterday when you showed the armbar from mount, I'm like, I gotta go back and reteach my coaches and my kids because I've been doing it wrong, right? You know. But I think it's very dangerous and impossible for somebody to make improvements if they're not willing to do that, because it would be impossible, right? If you have an aversion or just an unwillingness, you're so set in your ways, well, you, by definition, you can't change. And transformation is transforming from one thing to hopefully something better, and then something better. But the leaps in between are being willing to accept the new information and then changing accordingly. So I think that's interesting to hear you talk, because again, I'm struggling with this idea of transformation, so that when people do ask me that, hey, how'd you go from sweeping out houses for $8 an hour to, you know, having four successful children and multiple homes and things like this, and I haven't given enough thought, and now that's just another piece to tell people. The first thing you have to be willing to do is admit that you don't know it all. And then when somebody does provide you with better information, a better way of doing things, like Steve Whittier did with you and I, then you have to be smart enough and open enough to accept it. Here's the thing. Don't get wrapped up in like, oh, how many people showed up, how many people joined. I don't care if anybody joins. Like, if nobody joins because you did it, you did the right thing. You're doing the right thing for the right thing, right?
People are talking about it.
You're doing something for your community. Like, if you want people to think that your organization is legit, then do legit stuff. Like, give away the bully proofing, give away the women's self-defense. If nobody joins, so what? So what? Like, that's just a bonus if people join.
And then people like I think maybe Keith and I talked about, we might have talked about it as a group, the idea that you are building value. So something you had said about.
We talk to each other. The different business owners in the organization get together and talk to each other. Chris Conley finds a better way to do whatever.
Instagram,
We're all going to do it. Everybody's going to jump on board and do it, because at the end of the day, what we're interested in is results. And so, you know, it's an attitudinal disposition of being willing to change your mind, combined with that goes hand in hand with a willingness to be vulnerable, because you can't have that attitude unless you're willing to say, I don't know, right? If you're unwilling to say, I don't know, there's nowhere to go.
I came to Matt, you know, tattooed and ornery and with my brother, and, you know, so you know, you're working with a group of people that are already, whether they want to admit it or not, are very insecure, very wrapped up in their ego, very wrapped up in their machismo. I think sometimes jiu-jitsu gets all of the credit, and I don't think that's fair, because well, and not just that, but I'd be a little egotistical here, but I think Straight Blast Gym has a lot to do with it, because I've been to other jiu-jitsu schools, I've been to other MMA schools where just by virtue of training there doesn't mean that you're going to be vulnerable, because they haven't provided an environment where you can feel safe to be vulnerable. And so it actually just continues to perpetuate that insecurity, that machismo, that puffy chest bullshit, right? And I guess what I'm so excited about, or what I feel so happy and positive about myself right now, is that we have something now that we can improve other people's lives and help them do some things that they're not currently doing. Like if they're insecure right now, or if they're living in fear of whatever, we have a vehicle where they can get in, and we know that we can dramatically improve their life. And there's nothing else in the world of therapy that is even I could have never done that. For one thing, I would have never gone to see a therapist because of the insecurities and lack of willingness to be vulnerable.
Right.
And yes, jiu-jitsu and combat sports and just the honesty of them, for sure, is a necessary ingredient, but it's not the only one.
It's necessary but not sufficient.
Right.
It's a necessary but insufficient component. There has to be other elements. There has to be the environment where people are willing to engage in that, and there has to be a maturity from the top down. I will tell you about one of the things I regret the most about my teaching. Bill and Rodney, for the people who've been around a long time, would know who I'm talking about with those two names. Both those people would not survive in our gym, not because we would beat them up, but they would just go away because we wouldn't allow them on the mat because they were dangerous.
What are we doing? You gotta think about it. I don't do anything on your neck.
In both cases, you're talking about two people who are emotionally a bit disturbed and dangerous, and we're interested in and we're hurting people in many cases. And I was not as diligent as I should have been at all about policing my mat, and now we wouldn't allow people like that on the mat, because one person like that on the mat changes the environment where other people don't want to be vulnerable. You don't want to be vulnerable with somebody that if they catch your arm, they're going to put it on, or who's going to try and tell you to keep your hands up and then hit you in the body and try and knock you unconscious because they're so insecure. Nobody's going to want to grow in that kind of environment. So part of the role of I don't want to sound overly paternalistic, but part of the role of a head coach is similar to the role of a father, is basically you just keep people away from the kids who are going to be bad. You're just basically weeding people out. You're kind of like a police for the mat. And that's super important. And it's not about politics. Nobody cares about your politics on the mat. It's not about, mutable characteristics or skin color. Nobody cares about any of that stuff. It's not about how much money you make. It's a perfect meritocracy. You could be a construction worker, you could be a Republican, you could be a Democrat, you could be a hippie, you could be a redneck, you could be white, you could be black, you could be Chinese. Nobody cares. You could be male, you could be female, you could be young, you could be old. But what you can't be is somebody that's going to hurt other people.
Right.
And so when you come on the mat, you have to be willing to play according to those rules and be that kind of person, or you won't survive. And that's super important for creating that environment. That was something that was lax before, mostly because I was being selfish, and it's like, okay, I can beat this guy up, so we'll just beat him up. We'll use these people as people, you know, that we can demo with, but I wasn't thinking clearly, because really my concern should have been everybody beneath them.
If I can segue on that too, two things. One, you say that like they wouldn't stick around or be around, and I would actually say that you're absolutely right. But part of it is they wouldn't want to be.
No.
Like those types of people, they're looking for something different than what we provide. Yeah. What we're providing now, and it would turn them off to hear the way that we want people to roll and feel comfortable with each other. Like we're polar opposite of those guys. So they wouldn't be here. Not only would obviously we would ask them to leave, but I think they would self-select in our environment now.
100%.
And then the next thing I want to say about that too is I remember a time where we thought and this is just till recently for me personally, where I thought the correct response, if you had a student that was rolling too rough or just kind of being a dick,
Crank it on.
yeah, put the boots to him, right?
I always get that lesson.
Yeah, but it's illogical, because then when you look back on it and you think, okay, well, here's somebody who's rolling rough. So the best guy in the gym goes, grabs him, and ramps it up and rolls even harder. Basically, we were reinforcing, you know, because now we're teaching them, hey, this is how coach rolls, this is how such and such rolls. I guess I'm doing it right. I just need to do it harder. Yeah. And so, you know, that's just another example of one of the changes that have happened over the years that is for the better.
100%. Inherent in all this, I want to make sure is really clear in maintaining a open mind and a willingness to change your opinions and creating an environment for people where they're safe so they can be vulnerable. And that's kind of the formula for growth and transformation. You also have to believe it's possible. And there's an optimism, a deep-rooted optimism that I think sometimes gets missed or glossed over. That's inherent. It's innate to jiu-jitsu. So if you remember the interview when Hickson was here, when he's talking about, he for whatever reason felt a deep responsibility to defend the family. So at any moment, some giant guy like Zulu comes and he has to go fight this guy to defend his family's honor. And so what does he do? So he sets about trying to find the most technical way he can to survive and win and defend against somebody bigger and stronger who's trying to hurt you. If that's not optimism, I don't know what is. I mean, you have to believe at some level that jiu-jitsu you can solve those problems. So instead of seeing a barrier in your path that you have to overcome, instead you're seeing a puzzle that you can find a solution to. And Chris Howder is also someone which can get missed, who's deeply optimistic, because his basic rule, his number one rule for grappling, aside from being on top, but for longevity, is never stop rolling. Never stop rolling. He's told me that a million different times. What he means by never stop rolling is, you know, you can't quit. You always have to get back on the mat. The moment you stop rolling, you're not allowing yourself to be vulnerable anymore. And then you put yourself in a position where, this was the case with somebody like Rodney, would never roll with anybody that wasn't a black belt. I would have never given him a brown belt because he would have never gone on the mat with brown belts and rolled in front of people. Always had to be private. So you can't get there because you're not willing to be vulnerable. And when he says never stop rolling, that's what he means, is basically what he's saying is never stop being vulnerable. And inherent in that is the idea that you can continually grow as long as you're rolling. You can continually grow. So jiu-jitsu shows us that obstacles are just puzzles, and that every puzzle will admit to a solution. And year after year, that's proven true. As somebody comes up with something that seems undefendable or that you can't stop, and then, you know, lo and behold, over time you evolve and you're able to stop it and defend it, and the game continues, and it's never ending. And so there's a deep-rooted optimism that's there, that as long as you maintain that ability, that willingness to be vulnerable, that willingness to change your mind, you know, you will transform, you will change. I've never seen anybody in jiu-jitsu who didn't have that attitude and didn't quit, who didn't stay on the mat, who didn't get better.
Right.
Not one.
That's the third piece now for me. So back to transforming, and that we all can. Like everybody can be optimistic about the fact that they can change who they are and become a better person. Yep. But here's the third piece. So the third piece is what you just said, not seeing things as obstacles, not seeing things as insurmountable, but always viewing all of those challenges in life as an opportunity to solve something. So it just totally puts the whole thing in perspective for me, because SBG and Jiu-Jitsu taught me to be comfortable being uncomfortable and not to run from it. And then it taught me to be willing to change my opinion, to change my view on something when I was presented with better information than my previous information, whether it be training methods or how to treat other people, you name it. You have to be willing to first be willing to change, right? And then the third piece is, you know, don't view things as obstacles. Don't view things as from a pessimistic point of view. Get excited about them. Like, look at it like, here's another opportunity for me to solve this puzzle. Here's another chance for me to use my brain. Here's another chance for me to take another step forward. And so, I mean, I'm excited right now only because I've been struggling, like I said, to try to put this, what are the pieces of transformation, and how can we help other people transform? And I mean, I think those are at least three big ingredients right now. In my mind, there's certainly things that if I look back over the last 18 years, all three of those things played an incredible role. And most recently is just that ability to change and let go of old ideas, old beliefs, stop defending things because I want to win the position.
Right.
But being willing to admit to, be vulnerable, accept the fact that I was wrong.
Yeah.
I was wrong.
Yeah.
I messed up. I'm sorry. Like, I'm going to move forward now, and now I have a better way to move forward.
100%.